Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. Dr. Shook here. Today, we are going to finish our three-part series on immunological triggers, autoimmune triggers, and perpetuators. We're going to talk about foods, and this is actually our third video in a series of presentations on foods and how they are very unique in the different mechanisms and ways that they've been shown to trigger and drive autoimmune processes. So, what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and I'm in North Carolina. We've been sheltering in place for, I guess I have technically been, this will be the third week. So I have my shelter in place haircut. So I hope you all enjoy this self haircut, which I did have some help with it, or it was far worse. But I hope everyone's doing well. What I want to do is continue the series that we've been on this journey of, and that is dealing with looking at the triggers and drivers of autoimmune processes, what we know, and we're going to talk about foods and part 3. I'm trying to break these up so they're not quite as lengthy, but what I'm going to do is share my screen with you, and we'll go ahead and get started. So let's talk about this a little bit. So we've talked about in a few of the previous videos, we've covered gluten, we've covered intestinal permeability and barrier systems of the body and how important they are to the immune system. And when those things break down, that's when we start seeing this immunological reaction to foods that have been shown in the scientific literature to trigger autoimmunity and also to be perpetuators or drivers of it. And if you guys have any questions or anything, post them in the comments and I'll try to answer those at the end of the live stream. Okay. So a few videos have already been done. This video, so if you go to our Facebook page, if you go to our YouTube channel, if you go to the Greater Hickory Thyroid Support Group in Facebook, you can scroll down the timeline, or you can go to our videos tab on YouTube. You can go to our videos tab on the Office of Dr. Brad Shook Facebook page, and you'll be able to find this video. Just look for this thumbnail. But this is on the barrier systems, how they break down, and how that really is where a lot of the problems begin. Now, we've already done one video on foods. Part 1, the thumbnail looks like this. I really go into great detail on gluten, and there are so many things about gluten that I guarantee you will learn from that video, that even if you've been studying gluten, even if you've read books on immunological reactivity to gluten, I'm going to talk to you about things that you're not familiar with. The 99% of people are not familiar with the way that gluten can cause reactivity to a lot of human tissues, ovaries and brain. And this is, so I went really deep on how gluten itself can contribute to a lot of other problems that you may not have considered. Then we did part 2. We completed part 2. Part 2, I went into a greater detail on cross-reactive foods with gluten. So basically foods that your body reacts to exactly as it would react to gluten. And a lot of people don't realize that sometimes the immune system can't differentiate, something like gluten from corn. And eating corn will trigger the same immunological reactions in some people that gluten will trigger. So it's very important to understand those concepts. And in this video, we're going to finish out foods, okay, and we're going to go into some other details that I'm sure you're not familiar with. Cooked and raw versions of foods. We're going to look at modified foods. We're going to talk about artificial food colorings a bit. We're going to look at different components of food that are known to cross-react with human tissues that we haven't talked about, and so I'm going to go into a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of, and then we're going to talk about okay, why does that stuff happen and what do you have to consider? So there's several things that we're gonna cover, okay? First concept, and I've reviewed this in all of the previous videos. The primary mechanism that we're looking at here behind how this happens, so our body reacts to a food, okay? And then that food somehow contributes to either triggering an autoimmune process or driving it. What is the idea behind how that happens? Why would that occur? And so this concept of molecular mimicry is key. Okay, it's a very important thing to understand. And basically, what this diagram shows you is that on the right hand side, and just for illustrative purposes, the orange 6-sided object is gluten. Okay, so that's like, let's say gluten protein. It's a protein found in wheat. And the thing that looks like Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man is an antibody. So your immune system makes that when it sees something foreign, and it is designed to attach itself specifically to the thing that it's reacting to. So gluten. So it's supposed to fit perfectly, right? So that's why the shapes they match. Well, in the body, some of our human tissues, like our thyroid tissue, for example, as is illustrated here, may part of it may look very similar to that of gluten. So the antibody, which is kind of a tag that our immune system makes to that is designed to adhere or stick to something that has been identified as foreign and mark it or tag it as foreign so that other cells can come behind and destroy it. Those antibodies may actually attach themselves to some of the tissues of our body because of the similarity in shape. This is called molecular mimicry. And that's what you're seeing here in this illustration. You're seeing that the antibody that was made against gluten may be able to attach itself to thyroid tissue because it's so similar. This is a key concept to understand when we're talking about foods. Now, there are other biochemical mechanisms and theories behind this. And some of the primary theories are bystander effect. And that's another mechanism. I think I'll have a slide on that in a second. But the main thing that you need to consider with these food reactions is that they activate the immune system. So they're driving an active immunological response that you can measure in the blood. Okay, that's what we do with testing. These will drive an inflammatory response. They also may cross-react with human tissues, which is what I just showed you. So if the body is reacting or the immune system is reacting against a food, it may actually cause a reaction against some of your other tissues. And the scientific literature shows us that this happens with a lot of different foods. And I'm going to talk about those in just a second. So it also is something that can promote and drive intestinal hyperpermeability, which is this concept of leaky gut. And that in and of itself, if you have leaky gut or hyperintestinal permeability, which means abnormally high amount of permeability, because your intestines is a naturally permeable barrier system. So it lets things into the bloodstream to help the body heal and repair, and it keeps things that should not be there in the intestinal tract. But when it becomes hyperpermeable or it becomes leaky, it develops larger holes. It becomes broken down. That barrier system will let things in that can actually, like, for example, poorly digested food proteins. And those food proteins, your immune system may start reacting to those at a greater rate and reacting to more food proteins. That will drive an inflammatory process that may perpetuate autoimmunity, but it definitely drives more inflammation, which tends to feed into a cycle of further degrading the intestinal lining. This usually happens through mechanisms like the inflammatory levels go up due to the food reactivity, so you'll produce more cortisol in an attempt to quench the inflammatory chemistry that's there that has been created. Well, increased cortisol over a prolonged period of time will thin the intestinal lining and can impair the repair mechanisms of the gut wall, and then therefore you're kind of feeding into the cycle of the inflammatory process causing leaky gut causing more inflammatory process, and this vicious loop. That's why you have to understand, clinically, I've seen that the best that we've been able to do with people is identify as many things as possible quantitatively, like actually do immunological testing with them to figure out what they're reacting to, what chronic infections, which is things we'll talk about in a later video, because the overall approach that we're looking at here is, remember, a three-part approach: barrier systems, triggers of the immune response, which include foods, pathogens. And pathogens is a whole different video, which are pathogens are bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites, and then even chemicals. So those are triggers and perpetuators. And we're also talk about the immune system regulatory function or loss of regulation. And those are kind of like the three parts, the triad of autoimmunity. And when those things start to break down, that's when you start to see the expression of autoimmunity. And clinically, when we look at those things very carefully and we can, apply this bio-individuality to the person, so like figure out what's happening with each unique person, that's when we have the best chance of unwinding some of this damage that's occurred. So here are some of the things that you really want to consider when you're looking at food immune reactivity testing. Okay, there are a lot of tests that I've seen, and a lot of companies have marketed to me, and I'm not saying that their tests are invalid. I'm just saying you have to consider these factors, or I'm not going to consider the test. Okay. So at a minimum, these factors. So you have to consider, first of all, you have to look at foods in the form that we consume them. Okay. So what forms do we consume foods? We consume them in cooked forms, right? We cook food. We consume them in raw forms, uncooked, right? We consume them in modified forms, which means that they're fermented. There's a processing of some sort that has occurred, right? So some type of modification. So there are very, very, very few tests that take into consideration those things. Most food sensitivity tests look at raw versions of food. So when you get a raw version of a food on a food sensitivity panel that comes back, or all the tests were raw, well, how do you know you're not reacting to the cooked version of the food, which is maybe the only way that you eat it? So that's a real problem. That's a real problem because it's not applying a real life scenario to the testing. It doesn't match real life scenarios, which are it's the only way to really do it, and do it in a way that's going to be meaningful and useful. So when you heat a food over 118 degrees Fahrenheit, that will change the protein shape of the food protein itself. So when you do that, you may increase reactivity of the food, you may decrease reactivity of the food. That is unique to the individual. So an example is that bacon, when you cook it, is 10 times more reactive when it's cooked. Okay. So, I mean, not many people are eating raw bacon, I know, but it's just, this is the point. I mean, if you're looking only at raw versions of food, it's incomplete, and it may be misleading because you may be eating a cooked version of a food that tested negative, but you're highly reactive to the cooked version. So you want to be specific. Raw foods, of course, almost all testing that's done is food sensitivity testing that is done on raw foods only. So it's, in my mind, unless you eat a raw food diet only, which very, very few people do that. There are people that do it, but very few people. It's not going to apply. It's just not going to be effective. And then you have to look at modified foods. So let's take into consideration wine or anything fermented, right? Anything fermented. But wine, for example, is fermented, right? So that is a partially modified food. So you have to consider modification. Another thing that is very rarely checked are gums. So how many people consume gluten-free, or eat dairy-free, or maybe they eat dairy, but they use certain products that are thickened with xanthan gum or guar gum. There are many types of gums that are used, and especially when people are dairy-free and they use like these dairy alternatives like rice milk, soy milk, almond milk, all these different types of milks. If you look at them, the reason that they're not really watery is because they tend to add these gums to them that make them thicker, because a gum is a very large molecule and they stick together. So when they put those into these dairy these dairy replacements, they can make them creamier by adding more gums to them. But gums can be highly reactive. People can be highly reactive to gums. And I'm going to talk to you in a second about how that can really set off the immune panel. It can cause a lot of positives. So gums have to be evaluated. And then known cross-reactive foods with human tissues need to be evaluated. So for example, shrimp tropomyosin is a component of shrimp that has been shown to cross-react with the human colon. So if you have someone, or with tropomyosin in the gut, if you have shrimp tropomyosin that's positive, that might be a good, you need to look at that and say, well, this is known to cross-react with the gut. Could this be occurring? Right? Could this be occurring? And then you've got this fish parvalbumin, which is, albumin it's a protein in our blood. It's very important. And if you're reacting to the fish, the fish parvalbumin, then you may have cross-reactivity with the human albumin. This is a big problem. So this would be something obviously you would want to know. And conventional testing, regular food sensitivities, especially allergy testing, doesn't even apply to this. So plant aquaporins. Now, aquaporins are a component of certain plants that we know cross-react with neurological tissues in the body. So if you saw that those were positive, you would say, wait, we might have autoimmunity to neurological tissues, to brain, nerves, whatnot. So very important to look at the foods more thoroughly. It's not as simple, and everything is really connected. When you look at this, diet's important, and it's you need to intervene and do the things that you can do, right? That to help yourself. And so, people look at this and then become overwhelmed and like, well, I don't even know what to do. So why do I do anything? Well, it's always good if you don't have a great diet to change diet to a healthier diet. That just is it. That tends to help for a lot of different reasons. But bio individuality, I can't emphasize it enough. I mean, it's why people go on like specialized diets or elimination diets, and they may do well or they may not do well. These are some of the reasons, because there's such uniqueness to each individual. Tissue binders. Okay, so there are tissue there are components of foods that will bind with human tissues. Okay, and when they bind to human tissues, they create something new, a neoantigen, something new that the immune system has not seen. And this new thing, this new foreign thing that is a component of like a lectin or an agglutinin that has bound to human tissue, now is foreign, and the immune system may react to it. So when we talk about tissue binders, food sensitivity testing needs to look at lectins and agglutinins, which will all bind to human tissues. And I'm going to show you in this chart. I want to show you some the significance of this. Okay, now I touched on this, I think, in one of the past videos, but this chart I think is a little bit easier to read. So if you look at the vertical axis here, it says in the top left-hand corner, it says tissue, and straight down below tissue, you're going to read all these different types of tissues. You're going to read there's skin and stomach and intestinal lining, and the lining of the colon, connective tissue, thyroid, cartilage, liver, pancreas, kidney, prostate, skeletal muscle, heart muscle, which is cardiac, breast tissue, pituitary gland, eyes, brain, meaning the myelin, the covering of the brain. And then across the top, you'll see that they're the different colors. So you're going to see wheat germ agglutinin, which is an agglutinin that you'll find in wheat. You'll see soybean agglutinin, peanut agglutinin, lectin, lentil lectin, pea lectin, bean agglutinins. And so as you see below those individual agglutinins or lectins across the top, you'll see that there's a color that may fill the square below. That is an indication that like, for example, the first column, the wheat germ agglutinin, that's yellow. So let's see, it is beside of so the square that meets for skin and wheat germ agglutinin is highlighted yellow. That indicates that wheat germ agglutinin has been shown to cross-react with, or bind, I should say, bind to skin. So if you're eating wheat germ agglutinin, you may have a problem with it. And the wheat germ, maybe you have no sensitivity to gluten. Maybe you have no problem with gluten, or at least your immune tests say that. Well, what if you have problems with wheat germ agglutinin? What if you have problems with the agglutinin and the binding to the skin? Then that makes it that creates a neoantigen, something new that the immune system will then react to. So, for example, skin, wheat germ agglutinin has been shown to bind to human tissue, to skin. Soybean agglutinin has, peanut agglutinin has, lentil lectin has, and so have bean agglutinins. So when you start looking at this, I mean, how many people have problems with their thyroid? Maybe wheat germ agglutinin is binding there. Maybe soybean agglutinin is, or lentil lectins, which has been shown in the scientific literature. Maybe someone has problems with where is I know I don't see it on this chart, but there's in another chart, I know it's just more expanded. They showed ovaries. So could you have autoimmunity against the ovaries? But I mean, just all these autoimmune tissues or autoimmune processes that could be occurring due to these agglutinins or lectins that could bind to human tissues. This has to be considered. This is not considered with a food sensitivity test when you're looking at food proteins. Okay, so when you're just looking at a standard test that just looks at food proteins, it's not as thorough of a workup as can be done today based on the science and the technology and information that's currently available. Okay, so I want to say that it's not that it's not helpful, but it's definitely not complete. It leaves a lot of holes based on what we currently understand. So One of the things that's really important to understand, I mentioned earlier that gums are commonly used as thickeners, right? As to thicken these dairy replacements. So gums like xanthan gum, guar gum, and there's several other gums that are used as thickeners. They are huge molecules, and they're bit large molecules, so they stick together, and that's why they are used, and very efficient thickeners of things like rice milk and soy milk and whatnot. But these gums, if you're reacting to gums, they tend to, because they're so large, they tend to create a lot of food reactions. So we know that, for example, if I was, to do a food sensitivity test or one of these panels and look at 180 different foods, and if I saw that someone was reacting to 80% of those foods, I know something is up. That's not a normal thing to react to all those foods. That typically means that they're reacting to, like, to gums, for example, or they have a chronic infection of some sort. The what you'll find is that Epstein-Barr virus, if it is reactivated, not if you have antibodies to a past infection, if you have a reactivation of the virus, or if you have just been infected for the first time, then that can be something that will really mobilize the immune system, and you'll see a lot more reactivity to food proteins. Same thing with Borrelia infections. So Borrelia burgdorferi is the spirochete bacteria that has been indicated and that causes Lyme disease. So if someone has an infection with the Borrelia, they may have reactivities to a ton of different foods. So you have to look at this, and you have to remember everything is connected. That's why you can't just, like, well, hey, I just want to figure out what foods I can or cannot eat, and that's going to be where I want to start. And then you get a food sensitivity test, and it's crazy like that, where you're reacting to the majority of the foods. Well, that may not be exactly what's happening. You're not necessarily reacting to all those foods. You actually have a chronic infection that's driving the immune system, and your immune system is hyperreactive to a lot of different proteins. So this is, you have to, if you're trying to get to the root cause of the problems, you have to consider the complexity of the human system. It's far more complex than just the simple, linear, A plus B equals C. It's just not quite. It's not that way. There's a lot of factors that you have to take into consideration. So a lot of questions that I get is, do you need to keep reactive foods out of your diet forever? And here's the thing: if you're cross-reactive with human tissues, so if we know that the food, like the shrimp tryptomycin, is cross-reactive with intestinal lining, for example, or with tryptomycin in the human body, then you would keep it out forever. Okay, if there's something that cross-reacts with human tissues, you just keep it out forever. If it is not cross-reactive, then you can take it out for usually 6 months. You work on addressing chronic infections, anything else that might be going on, healing the gut, restoring stomach acid production, restoring good digestive enzyme production, and then you can retest to see if the person's regained oral tolerance to the food. So are they reacting to less foods? Not no foods. Are they just reacting to less foods? You want to see a trend towards oral tolerance, which means they're reacting to less foods. Then you might be able to reintroduce it at that point. That's at least where we are today. Now, this is an important thing to also talk about. Like, why is this happening in the first place? Like, okay, so I realize there are these issues with foods, and why am I reacting to this in the first place? Like, how did this happen? Why is this happening? What started that reaction, and what started the food sensitivity reaction? And so what we know, and what we think we know, I should say, is that there are several different factors that go into play here. And so there are a lot of potential drivers of this. The primary gateway would be the initiation or starting, or the creation of leaky gut. So the beginning of leaky gut or hyperintestinal permeability. Whenever that is initiated at a high rate, like I said, the gut is always permeable, but it's selectively permeable. If the barrier system is broken down, it can be broken down a few different ways. This is a very likely mechanism for how this process would begin. There are many, and we don't even know them all, but there are many different ways that this process likely begins. So the poor digestion of proteins, for example. So if you're just consuming foods, but you're poorly digesting the foods. Now, Why would you poorly digest foods? Well, maybe you have a problem with, like, for example, hypothyroidism. And maybe because you're hypothyroid and you don't have a high enough of thyroid hormone, you're physiologically, all of the cells of your body are working inefficiently. So maybe you're not able to concentrate stomach acid as highly as you should. So because of that, you're poorly digesting your food proteins. When the food moves from the stomach into the small intestine, you get a poor release of enzymes by the pancreas and the gallbladder, and then therefore the food is poorly digested, and you're not breaking the proteins down into their individual building blocks, which are amino acids. And as that occurs, maybe that encourages bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth, and then you start developing problems with the intestinal tract microflora, and that could perpetuate and cause breakdown and irritation of the gut lining. This could lead to these proteins getting into your bloodstream and then reaction to the partially digested food proteins. So poor digestion of these proteins, poor enzyme activity, poor stomach acidity. And what causes the thyroid issue? Lots of things could cause that. So you always have to, you have to try to look at, like, what all is happening to the person, like consider as many factors as possible that could be interconnected. And you try to intervene at as many points as possible within reason at one time to break these vicious cycles or loops that occur. So, that is one potential mechanism. Artificial food colorings. This is an interesting thing. So artificial food colorings have been shown to bind to proteins and inhibit the breakdown of proteins that we consume. They've also been shown to bind to human tissues. So it's interesting, but they could bind to food proteins, inhibit the activity of the enzymes upon the protein, and so it would maintain this food coloring plus protein complex that is very difficult for the body to break down. And it can also, artificial food colorings can bind to human tissues. So some of them can. So this could be a potential mechanism. Chronic infections, as I said earlier, chronic infections, especially of the GI tract, are probably one of the most common things I see in practice. When we do testing with people, screen for pathogens, do stool panels, we find very commonly that there is a significant imbalance of the GI tract bacteria. And occasionally you'll find parasites and fungal overgrowth. Bacteria like H. pylori is extremely common to find. So there's quite a few different reasons that chronic infections can drive an inflammatory process and may lead to the initiation or cause leaky gut. Vitamin A deficiency. Vitamin A is very important for mucous membrane repair. And a lot of people are very deficient in vitamin A, just like they're very deficient in their other fat-soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, and A, D, E, and K. They're very commonly found deficient. Histamine reactions. So people have histamine reactions for different reasons, and histamine reactions can drive an inflammatory response, and they might be an initiating factor. High salt diets. Interestingly enough, high salt diets can create, in some people, inflammation in the digestive tract. So this is something that is not necessarily a bad thing to use salt, but it can be a problem if you're prone to autoimmunity, or especially GI tract autoimmunity. Those are just some of the factors, right? Other things are hormone imbalances. Okay, so we already talked about, like, how the thyroid might be connected. The thyroid might be connected through this process. Hypothyroidism. The thyroid hormones is important for every single cell in your body. Without adequate thyroid hormone stimulation, every cell in your body will dysfunction to some degree. So hypothyroidism may contribute to poor mucous membrane cellular turnover and repair, which your intestinal lining, that the barrier that we've talked about, is a mucous membrane. So if it doesn't repair efficiently, then you might have some problems with increased intestinal permeability, and then the cycle and reactivity to food proteins may begin. So the thyroid's incredibly important. Also, hypothyroidism causes constipation. The longer that your stool sits in your digestive tract, it can cause fermentation, bacterial imbalances, and that may lead to this dysbiosis or bacterial imbalance that irritates the gut lining and sets the stage for leaky gut. So thyroid has a lot of different mechanisms. A lot of different mechanisms that theoretically could initiate this. Cortisol. Okay, so stress. So someone that's under stress, their body will produce more cortisol in an attempt to quench and decrease the inflammatory load. Okay, so cortisol is anti-inflammatory, but cortisol at high levels or at very low levels has been shown to impair the intestinal lining regeneration. Okay, so if you can't repair the intestinal lining, if your body cannot properly heal the intestinal lining, which is your barrier system, then you may have some problems with leaky gut or with hyperintestinal permeability. So cortisol is a big one. Blood sugar fluctuations, and this happens because of insulin surges. Insulin is vital to life. You have to have it to live, but it needs to be, in an ideal situation, low and steady. When your blood sugar is fluctuating up and down, or your insulin's high, it drives it increases the level of an immune system protein called interleukin 6. Now, this is called a cytokine, and it's been shown to drive and be pro-inflammatory. So the problem there is that blood sugar spikes drive inflammation. We do not need chronic inflammation. Okay, this is something that I see a lot of times in my clients that I work with. There is major dysglycemia, where blood sugar is up and down and up and down, and it's a problem. So you've got to implement lifestyle and dietary strategies, and you can also use. We use different types of herbs and vitamins to help try to stabilize and assist with adrenal hormone output and help you with maintaining blood sugar. But it's something that has to be addressed. And estrogen. So problems with sex hormones can also be a problem. Now, estrogen is important for quenching. It's important for inflammatory regulatory control, inflammation regulatory control. So if your estrogen levels are very, very low, or if they're too high, it can create problems both ways. So hormonal imbalances are definitely something that are implicated and that need to be considered when you're trying to look at food sensitivities and what might be driving it. This is something. This is why you really have to take a comprehensive approach as much as possible. You have to look at as many factors at one time as you possibly can, try to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and then devise and implement a strategy where you intervene in as many ways as possible, within reason, without being completely overwhelming, to try and help the person to regain as much of their health as possible. And so this is the complexity of it. This is why it's taken 3 videos to talk about foods, because people want to make it as simple as you're reacting to a food and you remove that food and then you heal the gut. That's not enough. That is, in my opinion, that's too simplified of an explanation. It's too simplified of an approach. You may do well with that. Some people have, but it's typically incomplete. So if you're interested in like how I work with people to do this, you can just go to our website, scroll down, drbradchick.com, and you can click on Learn Our Method, and I'll walk you through in a video the exact process that I use clinically and when I work with people, my distance consulting clients, in the office and internationally. So you can check that out if you're interested. If you want more resources to help you help yourself, go to any one of these websites and you can learn more. If you're interested in like a self-help program, just something that's simple, that's diet, lifestyle, and we'll even talk to you about some of the supplementation that you would want to use, you can go to thyroidprogram.com. We've put that together. I use that with a lot of my clients that I work one-on-one with. I'll have them go through that while we're testing them and then making our approach more bio-individualized. We'll use that program. You can also go, if you want access to the supplementation that I use with people, you can go to thyroidprogram.com/fullscript, and you can just check these out there on the screen. You can look at a lot of different things here, but we have hundreds of videos on Facebook and YouTube, and I'll do as much as I can to help you out if you have any questions. I will do another video few days probably, and I'm going to start talking about pathogens. So we'll go into more detail and how pathogens drive the autoimmune process. And I think you'll start seeing some common themes on how this affects human health and physiology. It comes down to the immune system reacting to things that are that are chronically present, like these pathogens, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and different types of parasites can live within the body, and they can persist, and they drive chronic inflammatory responses, and they have been shown to be implicated in a lot of autoimmune conditions. So when we're trying to understand autoimmunity, hey, even when we're trying to understand optimal health, you want to look at all these factors to see what's going on, and then you tweak based on, and you specifically try to approach the solution based on the person's test results. That's because it's very bio-individualized. I've never seen anyone that has the same test results. It just doesn't happen. So these are all things that you can consider. Are there any questions or anything that I can answer? Let's see. Any questions? We have a few people on here. If we have any questions, I'll try to answer them. And then I got to run. I got a few things to do. Let's see. Hang out with the kids. I'm planting a garden, which wish me luck. All right, let's see. So, okay. Hello from London. Hi. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Donna. Yes, you can watch these videos anytime. Hashimoto's psychosis due to continuous use of birth control. So this was a YouTube question. I was wondering if you have met cases of people that had Hashimoto's and had psychosis due to the continuous use of birth control 2-3 months without interruption. The pill was Yaz. I actually have had several clients that have used Yaz. I've known people personally that have used Yaz in the past. I don't know that I don't know of Yaz. And now, if you have information on this, I'd love to see it. I don't know of where it has been connected directly to Hashimoto's or autoimmunity. I can tell you that birth control, the use of birth control or anything that raises estrogens, we've seen that create problems with thyroid hormone physiology, because typically increasing estrogens in the body will increase the number of thyroid hormone binding proteins, these little carrier proteins that carry the thyroid hormone through the bloodstream, kind of like a taxi cab, and then they drop them off at the target cell or tissue where it needs to be used. We have seen where taking estrogen or birth control pills will raise the number of those little transport proteins in the bloodstream. So there are more of them, and they will bind and hold on to the thyroid hormone at a greater rate, making less of the hormone available for the tissues. So the hormone levels are normal, but they're bound up in these transport proteins in the bloodstream. I'll typically look at T3 uptake to see to give me a good idea if that's occurring. We can also look at the free T3, we can compare like free T3 and free T4 to total T3 and free T3, and see if they're similar in their quantities. Like, are they both at about the 50% of the reference range, or is one much higher or lower? You can get a better idea of what might be happening there. But I don't know in particular if I've seen Yaz as contributing to autoimmunity. So I hope that helps. But I don't know of that. But again, if you do know of this, or if you have seen any research, and I'll try to search and see if I find anything on PubMed, let me know. I'd be happy to look at it. I would, love learning from you guys, and anything that you might be able to share with me. Hi, Vanessa. I hope you're doing well. Okay, let's see. Says no question, although ticks cause this could mold. Okay, so I think I understand the question here. So Borrella, been diagnosed with it, then other blood tests said no. Question is, although ticks cause this, can mold and damp cause this? So yeah, I mean, I think when you're saying cause this, definitely chronic infections that can drive multiple reactions throughout the body. So the interesting connection between Lyme disease, or between tick-borne diseases like Borrella and mold exposure, is that they both tend to create and release biotoxins into the body, and this drives a chronic inflammatory response. There's actually a diagnosis called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and if you want to learn more about that, you can check out this book by Neil Natham. He wrote this book. It's called Toxic. Fantastic book. But yes, mold is a problem. Mold is absolutely a problem. There are 1 in 4 people 1 in 4 people cannot deal with mold. Their body will drive a chronic inflammatory response. 3 out of 4 people, so 75% of people, their genetics will allow them to better tolerate mold, and it won't drive a chronic inflammatory response. It's still not a good thing, because when mold gets into your body, it releases these mycotoxins. These mycotoxins can be highly carcinogenic, meaning cancer causing, and they can create a lot of problems for people. So yes, this is something that you might see, like mold exposure, or you might see like Borrelia, that could create multiple food reactions for sure. So I hope that helps. Hi, Leanne in Alaska. Absolutely save this. Watch it later. Hi, Anna. Hope you're doing well. Anna says, how do you tell if you have food reactivity to human tissue versus just food reactivity? So, if you have reactivity to the idea, I think I understand your question. If you have food reactivity, then to a tissue, or if you have reactions to a food that may react with human tissues, it doesn't mean that you are reacting to human tissues for sure. So, for example, the shrimp example, the shrimp trypamicin example that I talked about, if you're reacting to the shrimp trypamicin, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be reacting to your trypamicin in your gut. Okay, but it is definitely something that you want to consider. So, what you would do is you typically want to order like the multiple tissue antibody panel, which looks at reactions to human tissues and see if they correlate. You could just say, look, I'm reacting to shrimp trypamicin and these tissues that are cross-reactive to human tissues. I'm just going to take these out of my diet and see if I don't feel better for, like, say, 6 months. And that's something that you might want to consider. If you have the tissue, the multiple tissue antibody panel that looks at over 30 different human tissues, you can look at that and say, okay, what cross reacts with these tissues? Like what foods might cross react with these tissues? What pathogens might cross react with these tissues? What chemicals might bind to my tissues and cause a reaction against these tissues? That's how you can kind of use those panels to kind of maybe reverse engineer, try to understand and reverse engineer the things that might be causing the reactions to those tissues. So I hope that helps, Anna. Okay, so let's see. A few other questions. Okay. So this is a question. I saw this. Hey, hi, Chris. So can you tell me what NAD supplement you use? You mentioned it's good for sinuses and mucus buildup. Okay, so it's NAC. So NAC, N-acetylcysteine. Okay, NAC. So that's the supplement. It's not NAD. NAD is a pretty popular right now. If you search NAD, but it's two different things. So it's NAC, N-acetylcysteine. You can just look up N-acetylcysteine, Google just NAC, and you should find it. I use the one that I use right now is made by Apex Energetics. It's called trisomal glutathione. It's one I'm using now. It has 3 different forms of glutathione in it. I believe there's reduced glutathione, there's liposomal glutathione, and then there is NAC. And NAC is a precursor. So biochemically, NAC, you have to have, when you take NAC, it can help your body to make glutathione. Glutathione is a master antioxidant. It helps with immune regulatory function, but NAC is also mucolytic, and it has been shown to have some benefits and antiviral properties. So that's the one that I use is NAC. Let's see. Hope that answers your question, Chris. She says, THC upper limit. I'm just reading the comments before I post them. Don't know the antibodies. Okay. Not sure I can answer that. Thank you for posting questions though. Let me see. With the eye, can the gut cause problems with the eye inflammation, basically? So that's a complicated question. There are tissues that cross react with the eye, and there are autoimmune diseases that affect the eye. So you'd have to be checked to see if that's autoimmune in nature. So I think the chart that I showed with the agglutinins and the lectins. There was an entire line that showed the eye, I believe. If you want to look real quick, we can take a look. We'll just go back real quick, and I can show you the chart. We can see here it is. Okay, so the eye is at the bottom. It's covered up by our comment. So hold on, I'm going to take your comment off, and then I'm going to take away this thing, and then let's make this full screen. So I hope that helps. Okay, hope that helps. Let's see with the comments. When you spoke about interactions of the gut with rice milk, almond milk due to gums, does that mean that any type of milk is no good for a gut altogether? No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean so. I talked about I talked about how the gums that are used as thickeners in some of the dairy replacements like almond milk, soy milk, rice milk, you name it, anything that is thickened that might normally have dairy added to it, right? Or as a substitute for dairy, you're going to see gums used a lot. You see gums used a lot in, quite frankly, a lot of different products. So you have to read the products. It doesn't mean that that no type of milk is good at all. But if you're if you're switching to these dairy-free alternatives that have these thickeners and you're still not doing well or things are getting worse, you need to figure out what's going on. And that could be a part of the equation that gums are reactive and that you're having reactions to the gums. So definitely something to keep in mind, but it doesn't mean that none of them are good. I would just say if you can avoid using them, just don't use them. But I know it's tough. So the easiest way to figure that out is to test for it and see if you're reactive. If that's not an option, then if you've been using them, take them out and see after a month or two if you don't feel better. But you're gonna have to give it some time. Okay. I wish there were an easier way to test that or figure it out, but unfortunately, there's not. So I hope that helps. Okay, so let's see a few more questions. Okay. Knowledge stream. Oh, hi, Tracy. Hope you're doing well. Tracy said that she was on Yaz for 25 years, went off, and within weeks, I had complete ovarian failure and went through menopause. Question: my tendons have all tightened to the extreme and are causing my hands and legs to curl in and be very tight. I mean, I will say this. I can't disclose who or what exactly, but I've had a lot of people that I know personally and clients that I've worked with that have used Yaz. And I know there were some warnings about it, and I don't know the exact connection. I'm sure, Tracy, I can't remember exactly, but I think that there's a lot on the internet about this particular topic. It's just not at the I haven't refreshed. I haven't seen this in a while, so I haven't thought about this. So I can't really speak to this with great specificity about what has been discovered in the connection. You probably know better than I do at this point. But the question with the tendons tightening and hands and legs to curl and be very tight. I mean, like, is that would all depend on, like, or is it just something that you perceive, or is this like a spastic type of thing that occurs? Because that could be neurologically related. So, those things would be, well, if there's no known cause for that, but this odd thing happening, I would look at like a multiple tissue antibody panel or something to see if there's not an autoimmune component that may be at play. But I don't know. That's a very specific and unique and individualized question. I have to look more at your history and talk to you more and refresh my memory about Yaz in particular and what is known today about it. But sorry, I can't help you more than that. But definitely, I need a lot more information. Sorry, I couldn't do a better job for you there. Hi, Bridget. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, Anna says, Anna's question, you're right. I think that the multiple tissue test is the answer for understanding um, maybe some of the connections between tissue cross reactivity and food cross reactivity. Every 2 days in the middle force higher than the highest limit. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So we were talking about Yaz, we're talking about birth control, we're talking about estrogens and how they might increase the little binding proteins in the bloodstream that could cause you to hold on to the thyroid hormone and not make it available for the tissues. This basically, high estrogens can disrupt transportation of the thyroid hormones. So the question was discussed earlier. So regarding Yaz case, the free T3 was at the middle and the free T4 was higher than the highest limit. So that sounds like hyperthyroid to a degree. So there's something going on with to make the free T4 high. So I've seen this a few times. I've seen medications too high. You have to talk to your doctor and see if that's the case. I've seen hyperthyroidism, so Graves' disease, in combination with Hashimoto's. I've seen Hashimoto's, which is an apparent autoimmune attack that causes dumping of thyroid hormone into the bloodstream, which causes the levels to be higher very temporarily, and just the timing of the blood draw. That was apparently what happened. There was no other explanation for it. So this is really, when I'm looking at that, I want to understand, it's good to understand what the estrogen levels are, and then also to look at the T3 uptake and see if the T3 uptake is low. If it's low or it's near the low end of the lab range, then typically I'm going to be really thinking about this thyroid hormone binding pattern where there's high thyroid hormone binding proteins in the blood and holding on to the thyroid hormone, not letting it be available for the tissues to use. Okay, so let's see. Chris, you are welcome. Vestibular and convergence dysfunction. Shay, I don't see a lot of patients with vestibular and eye convergence dysfunction. That's something that, typically is worked up by a neurologist, and then like a functional neurologist might be able to assist. There's a lot of different doctors out there, neuro-ophthalmologists, or that they can do rehabilitation. I mean, it depends on what's going on there, but I don't. I'm sorry. Very sensitive to these gums. Let's see. Just reading over some of the questions. Thank you guys for sharing. Difference between wheat germ and gluten is there? Okay, so these. Okay, I think that's all that I can answer right now, guys. But I do appreciate you so much. If you have other questions, concerns, post them here. I will try to do the next video on pathogens pretty soon. I'm working on a ton of other things though. I mean, I'm starting a garden, and then I'm also working on the Fit Body 50 program, which is it's something I want to complete. I've been testing the app that I've been using on my phone for 8 weeks now. I've completed 2 of the workouts that I've created, and I've created some at-home workouts that are body weight only, resistance band workouts, a lot of different things that people can do at home. And then there are numerous workouts that can be done with weights, but a lot of people don't have access to those right now in our current climate. So I'm trying to complete that and get it all ready. I mean, there's so much of it's done. We have a lot of, I've written 20 articles on very in-depth topics like cold thermogenesis, sleep optimization, advanced fat, body weight, and body composition, dietary strategies or nutritional plans. There's a lot of stuff that I've put together that no one's seen before, but I need to get that finished too. So I'm trying to balance what I'm doing, and then I'm also still working with clients across the United States and around the world via telemedicine, which I've done for several years now. So we're doing all those things and trying to balance that, and I have a family that I want to spend time with too. So I'm working on getting all those things done. I should have the next video on pathogens. I might break it into the individual pathogens. Bacteria might be a video. Viral might be a video. fungal, and then parasitic. I might do it that way. It just depends. I'll have to take a look and see how deep we want to go down that rabbit hole. But I do appreciate everyone, and I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions or concerns, please post them in this video, and I'll talk to you again soon. Hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks for joining me.